Sometimes the best conversations and topics that we can dive into when it comes to the Vancouver Canucks come from the subreddit. Now, don't get me wrong. I know how I am talked about on the R Canucks sub. The folks that use this subreddit don't really like me all too much. And I understand why. I understand that the content that we produce here on YouTube may not be tasty enough for any diehard fan who lives and breathes Canucks hockey and talks on the forums and discusses with other Canucks diehards about the team to an intricate level that in which we very rarely dive into here on this channel. I like to maintain that this channel is more so for not necessarily casual fans, but people who just want to check in and see what's going on. Because today, what we're talking about is one of the newest Vancouver Canucks free agent signings in Paul Cotter, a guy who was brought over to Vancouver after spending some time in the Vegas Golden Knights and New Jersey Devils' systems, and asking the question as to whether or not Paul Cotter could be the next Kefir Sherwood. You see, I am not necessarily a guy who likes to dive too deep into the comparables of it all. I like to do this for prospects because it's very easy for us to get an idea as to who a prospect plays like when we attach a name to it. But for established NHL players, it's a little bit different. However, I actually like this comparison a lot. Paul Cotter and Kefir Sherwood were both brought into the Vancouver Canucks under similar circumstances, and they both excel at some of the same things on the ice. We all recognize Kiefer Sherwood, a guy who was sent over to San Jose and who had signed a $5.75 million AAV contract till the end of 2031, was never fit to getting that type of a deal in Vancouver. We understand how much Alvin and Rutherford liked this guy. We understand how much he would have been willing to sign in Vancouver. But at the end of the day, it was a better move for the Canucks to trade him. He's 31 years old, and this was going to be his payday. The reason for that is because Kiefer Sherwood had 17 goals in 44 games to open up the season with the Vancouver Canucks, and while that's impressive in its own right, the fact is Kiefer Sherwood actually stopped scoring goals for a good chunk of the final few weeks of his Vancouver Canucks career. There was a really big period in November and December where Sherwood was cold, and then he got a hat trick against New York, and then he was cold again. Don't get me wrong, Kiefer Sherwood was a fan favorite, a guy who broke the NHL record for tracked hits in an NHL season, who came out guns a-blazing to open up 2025-2026 as one of the best goal scorers in the league by the time October finished up. Kiefer Sherwood was shooting at a really high shooting percentage, and he was one of the top goal scorers, but that was never going to last, and the Vancouver Canucks took advantage of that by sending him over to San Jose for some second-round picks. Now, we're taking a look at Paul Cotter, the newest Vancouver Canuck, and asking whether or not he could be the next Kefir Sherwood. Cotter comes to Vancouver under very similar circumstances to Kiefer, a speedy winger who doesn't shy away from a hit, one who potentially has some untapped upside and with a chip on his shoulder after being undervalued or overlooked by his previous organization. Not a bad bet for the Canucks. Will they strike gold once again? Now, as we had mentioned in yesterday's Paul Cotter to Vancouver video, this is a guy that actually does have a decent history scoring goals. He was a really interesting name for Vegas in the few years that he had spent in that system, getting some power play time unexpectedly and also scoring some points whilst providing some very consistent physical tools and physical dominance on the ice. 6'2", 212, and a guy who plays like a pure energy forward should. Paul Cotter got traded to New Jersey for Alexander Holtz in a move that was quickly seen as a pretty big fleecing by the Devils when you consider the fact that Paul Cotter opened up the 24-25 campaign as the league's best goal scorer. He had 4 goals in 4 games and added a 5th goal 3 games later. He was one of the top goal scorers for the span of about 2 weeks at the start of the NHL campaign, and Paul Cotter was the next best thing. He finished off that season with 16 goals and 22 total points in 79 games played, so obviously he fell off too, in the same way Kiefer Sherwood fell off goal-scoring-wise in this most previously completed season. But Paul Cotter is 5 years younger than Kiefer, and he's coming over to Vancouver with a chip on his shoulder at this $2.15 million AAV mark for a contract that lasts just 1 year long. He'll be in Vancouver, he'll probably do all right, and based off of his offensive productivity, which seems to come out in spurts, there is a very real chance Vancouver allows Cotter to grow his value and flips him at the deadline for a pretty decent package of picks or whatever else. Take a look at some of the comments on this R Canucks subreddit post. The guy has a shockingly good career shooting percentage at almost 15% and two 15-plus goal seasons. He feels like a guy whom, if you give him more minutes and more opportunities to shoot, like on a power play too, he might be able to hit 20 goals. It seems like the Canucks had a certain profile that they identified and were quick to act. Certainly a good gamble to outplay his contract. Another reply says apparently he is guaranteed money on breakaways and shootouts, so if we park him at center ice and let him have 3 breakaways a game, he'll be good for 252 goals. So yeah, you can essentially call him Pavel Bure 2.0. In B, the Cornflake says, I'm a New Jersey Devils fan. I loved Paul Cotter, but he is the ultimate $1 million arm, 10-cent head player. Top 6 skill? Easy. But maybe the lowest hockey IQ I have ever personally witnessed. Doesn't mean that he'll be bad for you. Last season was a disaster, but I strongly believe we were deploying him badly. I just wouldn't expect him to be particularly good at winning his minutes at 5-on-5. However, when you see Cotter get that breakaway, start celebrating because he is absolutely going to score. His hands are nothing short of nasty. He was automatic in the shootout for us. Take care of him in Vancouver. You know who else was really good on the breakaway? Kiefer Sherwood, oddly enough. And it wasn't like, oh, Sherwood was Pavel Datsyuk. He embarrassed goalies all the time. It was like, nah, when Kiefer Sherwood got speed on the breakaway, you don't know what he's going to do. Either he comes in and absolutely rips one from the hash marks and it goes in, or he does a nice little toe driggy around the D and then goes backhand upstairs on the goalie. Kiefer Sherwood had an arsenal of tricks that he was unafraid to use and rotate throughout when he did get fast breaks in the games that we saw in Vancouver. And it's part of the reason why he was able to score a lot of goals. Not every single one of Kiefer Sherwood's 17 goals in 44 games last year, or 19 goals in 78 games last year before that, not all of them were just like, oh, pure snipes or whatever. Like, nah, he scored a variety of ways. Paul Cotter seems to have that skill to finish in tight, especially if he has space. So we'll see how that manifests in Vancouver colors this upcoming year. A question is asked to the Devils fan. Sounds like Paul Cotter is an interesting player to watch. Did you ever see him in the playoffs? The Canucks are in a full rebuild right now, and one of the only ways to accrue draft capital is to sign free agents who would be good in the playoffs and flip them with pretension to contenders at the trade deadline. So the season before last, he played in the playoffs, but the Devils were so injury-riddled that it wouldn't be possible to say anything about his play. But in the regular season, he was much better than he was this past season. Still nothing more than a bottom sixer, but he did his job and did it reasonably well. But I could see a team giving the Canucks a 3rd-round pick, or maybe a 2nd if he has a good season, and if they really fell in love with his size and skill, plus ignored the downside. At the end of the day, if it worked for Vegas, and it worked for New Jersey, it probably would work for another NHL team, especially if Paul Cotter is given a big stage to show off what he can do, in the same way that Kiefer Sherwood was given a stage with the Vancouver Canucks this previous campaign. I mean, you just got to take a look at it. There were some games Kiefer Sherwood was getting 23 minutes a night, 24 minutes a night in overtime, 21 minutes a night in overtime, 20 minutes in regulation. Kiefer Sherwood was supposed to be a middle-to-bottom 6 winger, and he ended up being the top goal scorer on the team for far past the time in which he was actually traded from Vancouver. Can Paul Cotter have a similar effect? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this. And bye.